Biblical criticism. Biblical criticism is an umbrella term referring to the academic study and investigation of the Bible and its texts. Incorporating a range of methodologies and approaches to analyze, interpret, and understand the historical, literary, and theological dimensions of the Scriptures. The objective of biblical criticism is to gain a more profound understanding of the biblical texts, their origins, and their meanings, while also examining the historical and cultural context in which they were written. Biblical criticism is not a monolithic discipline but rather comprises several sub-disciplines, each with its unique focus and methodology. These sub-disciplines include textual criticism, source criticism, form criticism, redaction criticism, literary criticism, and historical criticism. While these approaches often overlap and build upon one another, they each contribute distinct insights into the study of the Bible. Textual criticism. Textual criticism is the oldest form of biblical criticism, dating back to the early Christian era. Its primary goal is to determine the most accurate and original version of the biblical texts by examining the vast array of manuscripts and translations available. Textual critics compare and contrast these manuscripts to identify variations, errors, and inconsistencies, often resulting from the copying and transmission process over centuries. Textual criticism is crucial for establishing the most reliable biblical text, which serves as the foundation for all other forms of biblical criticism. It is also essential for understanding how the text has evolved over time, and how different communities have interpreted and adapted the Scriptures to their specific contexts. Source criticism. Source criticism, also known as literary criticism, focuses on identifying the sources used by the biblical authors in composing their works. This approach seeks to uncover the written or oral traditions that may have influenced the biblical texts, as well as the possible relationships between different books and passages. One of the most famous examples of source criticism is the documentary hypothesis, which posits that the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible, is a compilation of 4 distinct sources: the Yahwist J, the Elohist D, the Deuteronomist D, and the priestly P sources. This hypothesis has been widely debated and refined over the years, but it remains a foundational element of source criticism. Form criticism. Form criticism is concerned with the identification and classification of the various literary genres and forms found within the biblical texts. These forms may include poetry, narrative, prophecy, law, wisdom literature, and more. By examining the structure, style, and function of these forms, form critics seek to understand the social and historical contexts in which they were created and used. Form criticism also investigates the oral traditions and processes that may have preceded the written texts, as well as the ways in which these traditions were adapted and transformed over time. This approach is particularly valuable for shedding light on the development of Israelite and early Christian communities and their religious practices. Redaction criticism. Redaction criticism focuses on the editorial process through which the biblical texts were compiled, organized, and edited. This approach assumes that the biblical authors were not merely passive transmitters of tradition but active editors who shaped and molded their sources according to their particular theological perspectives and concerns. Redaction criticism seeks to identify the unique contributions and emphases of each biblical author, as well as the ways in which they reinterpreted and recontextualized their sources. This approach is especially relevant for understanding the formation of the biblical canon and the diverse theological viewpoints represented within it. Literary criticism. Literary criticism examines the biblical texts as literary works, focusing on their narrative structure, characterization, symbolism, and other artistic features. This approach often employs the tools and techniques of modern literary theory, such as structuralism, post-structuralism, and reader response criticism, to explore the aesthetic and rhetorical dimensions of the Scriptures. Literary criticism is valuable for appreciating the artistic qualities of the biblical texts, and for understanding their impact on readers and interpreters throughout history. It also encourages a more nuanced and imaginative engagement with the Bible, as opposed to a strictly literal or historical reading. Historical criticism. Historical criticism seeks to reconstruct the historical context and events that shaped the biblical texts, as well as the ways in which these texts reflect and respond to their historical circumstances. This approach involves the use of archaeological, linguistic, and sociological evidence, as well as the comparative study of ancient Near Eastern and Mediterranean cultures and religions. Historical criticism is essential for discerning the historical accuracy of the biblical narratives and for understanding the religious, political, and social forces that influenced their composition. It also helps to illuminate the historical development of biblical faith and its relationship to other religious traditions. Reader response criticism. A theological and literary approach that focuses on the reader's engagement with a text, emphasizing the subjective interpretation and personal meaning derived from it. This method acknowledges that individuals' beliefs, experiences, and cultural backgrounds influence their understanding of religious texts, leading to diverse interpretations. Reader response criticism encourages open dialogue and exploration of multiple perspectives, recognizing that the meaning of a text is not solely dependent on the author's intent, but also on the interaction between the text and the reader. Narrative criticism. Narrative criticism is a theological approach that focuses on analyzing the structure, content, and literary aspects of biblical texts as narratives or stories. It examines the characters, plot, themes, and settings to uncover the intended meaning and theological message. This method emphasizes the importance of understanding the text within its historical, cultural, and literary context, and aims to reveal the theological truths and moral lessons conveyed through the narrative. By exploring the interconnectedness of the biblical stories, narrative criticism helps readers to appreciate the larger story of God's relationship with humanity, as well as the transformative power of these sacred texts. In conclusion, biblical criticism is a multifaceted and interdisciplinary field that seeks to deepen our understanding of the Bible and its rich and complex history. By employing a variety of methods and approaches, biblical critics aim to uncover the layers of meaning, tradition, and interpretation that have shaped the scriptures over time. While biblical criticism has sometimes been viewed with suspicion or hostility by religious communities, it ultimately serves to enrich and enliven our engagement with the sacred texts and to deepen our appreciation of their enduring significance.